Welcome to our channel, where we explore some of the most intriguing and often forgotten stories from history. Tonight, we're diving into the fascinating and complex world of drugs in Victorian England. This was a time when substances like opium, alcohol, and even cocaine were used widely, often without the understanding of the dangers they posed. While we now know the harmful effects these substances can have, back then they were sold as remedies, everyday products, and even recreational drugs. In this video, we will explore the drugs that were popular in Victorian England, how people used them, and what their presence in society tells us about the era. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and like the video if you enjoy these deep dives into history. And don't forget to comment below from which location you're watching this video. We love hearing from you. The Victorian era, spanning from 1837 to 1901, was a time of both progress and paradox. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the world, leading to remarkable advancements in medicine, technology, and industry. At the same time, there were darker, more hidden aspects of life during this period. One of the most surprising elements of the Victorian era was its widespread use of various drugs. The 19th century witnessed a cultural shift in the use of substances, and many of them were viewed as harmless or even beneficial by the public, despite their dangerous effects. The development of new pharmaceutical products alongside the booming trade in opium led to a complex and often contradictory relationship with drugs. Opium was one of the most commonly used drugs during the Victorian era, with a long history that predates the 1800s. Its use had already been well established in Asia, but it was introduced to Western society as a potent painkiller and remedy. The most popular form of opium during this time was laudanum, which was a tincture made by dissolving opium in alcohol. Laudanum was marketed as a solution to a wide variety of ailments, from headaches and insomnia to digestive issues and even emotional distress. Doctors regularly prescribed it, and it was widely available in pharmacies. Laudanum was even sold in various forms, including as a syrup, in pill form, or in liquid bottles, and it was often recommended for use by women, especially to treat hysteria or nervous conditions. However, laudanum was highly addictive, and its widespread use led to the creation of a significant number of addicts during the Victorian era. The drug's addictive properties were not well understood at the time, and many people who used it regularly, from upper-class women to working-class men, became dependent on it. Laudanum was used recreationally as well, and people would sometimes take it in excess for its calming, euphoric effects. It wasn't just reserved for medicinal purposes. Many writers, intellectuals, and artists of the time, including the poet Samuel Coleridge, used laudanum to enhance their creativity. This widespread use of opium and laudanum left a profound mark on society. Another drug that gained popularity during the Victorian era was cocaine. It was first isolated from coca leaves in the mid-1800s, and by the late 1800s, it had been introduced into various medicinal and recreational products. Cocaine was widely marketed as a cure for a variety of health problems, from headaches to fatigue. It was even included in the first formulations of Coca-Cola, which was originally marketed as a medicinal tonic. Just like laudanum, cocaine was believed to have beneficial effects, and its addictive nature was not fully understood at the time. It was commonly prescribed by doctors and widely used in everyday life. Cocaine, like opium, had a strong stimulating effect on the body. It increased energy, alleviated pain, and was even considered an effective treatment for depression and anxiety. The drug also had a significant impact on the world of Victorian entertainment. Many actors, performers, and musicians used cocaine to help them stay awake, focus, and perform at their best. However, like other drugs of the time, cocaine quickly became associated with dependency and addiction. Alongside these more well-known substances, alcohol also played a prominent role in Victorian society. While alcohol had always been a part of life in England, its use was particularly prevalent during the Victorian era. The working-class population often turned to alcohol as a means of coping with the harsh realities of life. Pubs were central to the social lives of many Victorians, and then were places where both men and women would drink to relax or socialize. The middle and upper classes, on the other hand, often viewed alcohol consumption as a necessary part of socialization and refinement. Drinking at dinner parties, for example, was seen as a sign of sophistication. However, alcohol was not just a recreational substance. It was also considered a medicine. In fact, during the Victorian era, alcohol was included in many medicinal products, often without much oversight. Medicinal spirits, including gin, whiskey, and brandy, were marketed as cures for ailments such as anxiety, indigestion, and insomnia. Alcohol was even used as an anesthetic during medical procedures, though the risks of addiction were not fully understood. While opium, cocaine, and alcohol were the most commonly used drugs during the Victorian era, there were many other substances that found their way into the lives of the general population. Ether and chloroform, for instance, were both used as anesthetics, and their introduction to medical practice marked an important milestone in the history of surgery. These substances, while effective at numbing pain during procedures, were also dangerous and could lead to addiction or other health problems if used improperly. The widespread use of these substances, both for medicinal and recreational purposes, paints a picture of a society that was deeply engaged in the use, but one that lacked the understanding of their addictive properties and long-term effects. Drugs like laudanum, cocaine, and alcohol were often seen as solutions to societal issues, whether they were physical or emotional. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that the true dangers of these substances began to emerge. In our next part, we will continue to explore the cultural impact of drug use in Victorian England, how these substances shaped social norms, and the eventual push for regulation and control. We'll also look into the rise of the temperance movement, which sought to address the devastating effects of alcohol addiction and how it became a central issue in Victorian society. As we continue our exploration of the role that drugs played in Victorian England, it's essential to understand the cultural and social forces that ultimately began to push back against the rampant use of substances like opium, alcohol, and cocaine. The Victorian era, despite its great strides in industry, medicine, and society, was also marked by an era of excess, one in which substance abuse began to take a toll on both the individual and society. The shift in the public's perception of drugs would eventually lead to an organized movement focused on temperance, or the moderation or outright abstention from alcohol and the drugs. This was one of the key social reforms of the time, and its impact is still felt today. The temperance movement in Victorian England began to gain momentum in the early 19th century. At the time, alcohol was not just a recreational substance, it was deeply embedded in the fabric of daily life. For the working class, it was a way to cope with the harsh realities of life, including long working hours in dangerous factories, low wages, and poor living conditions. Alcohol consumption was common in public houses, and it was often consumed during the workday by men and women alike. While alcohol consumption was widespread and considered a normal part of social life, it also had significant negative consequences. Excessive drinking led to numerous problems: family breakdowns, domestic violence, and poverty. The working class, particularly men, would often spend the meager wages they earned on alcohol, leaving their families in destitution. Meanwhile, the upper and middle classes turned a blind eye to the devastation alcohol caused in the lower classes, often seeing it as a problem of the poor and as something that was simply out of their control. As alcohol began to tear at the fabric of society, the need for reform grew louder. The temperance movement took shape as a direct response to this crisis. It was initially focused on reducing alcohol consumption, particularly among the working classes, but it would later expand to include other drugs. The movement's roots can be traced to the religious revivalism of the early 19th century. Groups like the Methodists and the evangelical movement began to advocate for total abstinence from alcohol, seeing it as a vice that contradicted the Christian faith and moral living. Temperance societies began to form across England in the 1830s and 1840s, urging individuals to pledge abstinence from alcohol. The British Women's Temperance Association was founded in 1874, and it became one of the most vocal organizations advocating for a ban on alcohol. They not only saw alcohol as a vice, but also as a cause of women's suffering, as many women found themselves victims of alcohol-fueled abuse. The temperance movement was successful in rallying public support and even gaining political traction. In 1855, the temperance movement's first significant victory came in the form of the Beer House Act,
which made it more difficult to open new public houses and bars. Over time, the movement also pushed for limits on the number of taverns in towns, the reduction of working hours, and more stringent regulations on alcohol consumption. While the full prohibition of alcohol was never realized in England during the Victorian era, the temperance movement laid the groundwork for future policies and cultural shifts that prioritized health and well-being. While the temperance movement largely focused on alcohol, it did not ignore the broader issue of drug addiction. The use of opium, cocaine, and laudanum in Victorian society was rampant, and like alcohol, these substances were increasingly seen as problematic. In the early days of the 19th century, these drugs were sold openly and often recommended by physicians for a variety of ailments. Laudanum, which contained opium and alcohol, was particularly popular with women, who were often prescribed it for hysteria, a medical condition commonly attributed to women in the Victorian period. Cocaine, too, was marketed as a cure-all and was often added to patent medicines. It was even sold in lozenges, tonics, and syrups, claiming to relieve pain, boost energy, and even cure depression. However, the growing awareness of the addictive qualities of these drugs eventually led to social movements that began to demand restrictions on their use. By the late 1800s, medical professionals and social reformers were raising concerns about the dangers of widespread drug use. The issue came to a head in the 1870s and 80s, when the use of cocaine and opium became more publicly associated with poverty, addiction, and moral decay. As the temperance movement pushed for stricter regulation of alcohol, similar movements began to emerge to address the unregulated sale of narcotics. As awareness of the dangers of drugs increased, the first steps toward regulation were taken. In 1868, the Pharmacy Act was passed in the UK, which required that certain drugs, including opium, be sold only by licensed pharmacists. However, this law was limited in scope and did not address the widespread availability of drugs in patent medicines or the growing addiction crisis. The growing concern about drug abuse led to further regulation in the early 20th century, including the introduction of the Poisons and Pharmacy Acts, which sought to limit the sale of dangerous substances. While these regulations were a step in the right direction, they came too late for many who had already become addicted to opium, cocaine, and other substances. The 19th century had already seen the widespread suffering caused by drug abuse, and the cultural shift away from their use took years to fully take hold. The American Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 was one of the first pieces of legislation aimed at regulating narcotics. This act prohibited the sale of unlabeled narcotics and began the process of limiting the use of substances like opium and cocaine in commercial products. While the regulation of drugs and alcohol in the Victorian era was an ongoing battle, it marked the beginning of the modern era of drug control that continues to evolve today. The shift in attitudes toward drugs and addiction during the Victorian era was part of a larger societal shift toward moral and social responsibility. The temperance movement, while focusing primarily on alcohol, set the stage for the recognition that the abuse of substances, whether alcohol or narcotics, was a social issue that affected not just individuals, but families and communities. It highlighted the need for public health interventions, as well as social reform to address the root causes of addiction. Public awareness campaigns, medical research, and legal reforms began to shed light on the devastating consequences of drug use and the importance of prevention and rehabilitation. Temperance reformers laid the groundwork for modern public health campaigns, including efforts to address drug addiction and the growing concern about the health impacts of widespread drug use. As society moved forward into the 20th century, drug regulation, education, and treatment programs would continue to evolve, reflecting an increasing understanding of the need for more comprehensive approaches to addiction and social health. By the end of the Victorian era, society was beginning to realize the full scope of the consequences of widespread drug and alcohol use. The temperance movement and the push for drug regulation had set the stage for more rigorous laws and a deeper understanding of the dangers of addiction. The battles fought during this period shaped the way society would approach substance use and abuse in the years to come. As we close this chapter, it's important to remember that the rise of drugs and addiction in Victorian England was not just a social issue, but a medical and cultural one as well. It was a time of experimentation and ignorance, but also of growing awareness and reform.
As the Victorian era drew to a close and the 20th century began, the conversation about drug use and addiction evolved dramatically. The regulation of drugs, driven by growing awareness of their harmful effects, became more structured, and public health policies started to take shape. However, the ripple effects of the Victorian era's lax approach to substances like opium, alcohol, and cocaine were still felt in society long after. The reforms and regulations introduced during this period paved the way for the modern drug control systems we recognize today. In the years following the Victorian period, societies around the world began to acknowledge the harmful consequences of the widespread availability of addictive substances. By the late 19th and early 20th century, the medical community had started to recognize the dangers of addiction and the need for treatments that went beyond merely labeling addicts as morally weak or corrupt. This shift in attitude paved the way for a more compassionate approach to addiction and drug use, one that focused on understanding addiction as a disease rather than a moral failing. The early 20th century saw the establishment of formal government bodies aimed at addressing substance abuse. Governments began to regulate the production, distribution, and sale of drugs through new laws. The most notable early example was the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 in the United States, which aimed to curb the use of opiates and cocaine by regulating their production and distribution. It was the first significant step in transforming drug regulation into a matter of public policy rather than one left to the discretion of private merchants or unregulated pharmacies. This shift in public policy was a direct result of the work that began during the Victorian period. The temperance movement, which had grown in strength throughout the 19th century, laid the foundation for a broader societal movement toward health regulation. The movement had a profound influence on both medical and social practice, emphasizing the need for government intervention in areas related to public health, including alcohol consumption, drug use, and mental health. By the time the 20th century was in full swing, attitudes toward alcohol, opium, and other drugs were changing significantly. No longer were these substances seen as harmless or merely recreational. Society had begun to recognize them as dangerous and potentially destructive. The legalization of some substances, like alcohol, however, remained a contentious issue. While the temperance movement had succeeded in pushing for alcohol regulation and limiting its accessibility, the complete prohibition of alcohol in the United States during the 1920s created significant problems. The period of prohibition, while intended to reduce alcohol consumption and improve public health, led to the rise of illegal alcohol production and distribution, as well as a flourishing underground market controlled by organized crime. The consequences of the Victorian approach to drug use and addiction were still playing out. The absence of a clear, structured regulatory framework for drugs left many addicts without access to proper care and treatment. In the early 1900s, as addiction to opium, morphine, and alcohol began to be viewed more seriously as a medical issue, public health institutions began to develop more structured treatment methods. The establishment of drug rehabilitation centers and the recognition of drug addiction as a disease marked the beginning of a new era of drug treatment. However, despite progress in understanding addiction, the demand for drugs like heroin and cocaine remained high, particularly in the 1920s and 1930s. The misuse of drugs during these years would lead to the emergence of new forms of addiction, as well as the development of stronger narcotics, leading to the war on drugs policy
policies that would dominate the 20th century. The long-term impact of Victorian-era drug use was not just in the form of addiction, but also in the cultural attitudes towards substance. While earlier drug regulation focused on limiting substances like opium and cocaine, the latter half of the 20th century saw the demonization of drug use escalate. Drugs were no longer simply seen as a public health issue, but as a moral issue, and the focus shifted to punitive measures rather than education or treatment. Criminalization of drug use led to the mass incarceration of individuals found using or distributing illicit substances, a policy that disproportionately affected lower-income communities and people of color. The long-term effects of the Victorian drug culture were not just in the immediate regulation of opium and cocaine. They also laid the foundation for the global war on drugs that became prominent in the latter half of the 20th century. The social stigma attached to drug use and addiction, which had roots in Victorian perceptions of morality and discipline, persisted throughout the century and continues to affect how societies view drug addiction today. While modern drug regulation is based on principles of public health, prevention, and rehabilitation, many of the challenges faced in the 19th century, poverty, lack of access to medical care, and social stigma, continue to affect efforts to combat drug addiction. The Victorian period's approach to drug use may have been more relaxed and driven by profit, but it also planted the seeds for the legal and social struggles surrounding drug use that persist today. The journey from laudanum and cocaine tonics to the opioid crisis of today illustrates how deeply ingrained substance use and addiction are in society, and how the issues surrounding drug addiction remain unresolved even after decades of regulation. While society in the 19th century failed to fully understand the harmful impacts of drugs, the legacy of the Victorian era continues to inform the ways we think about and address drug use today. The shift from unregulated substances to the modern regulatory frameworks has been long and fraught with difficulty. The road to treatment, understanding, and prevention has been shaped by the failures and triumphs of past eras. As we look at the modern-day effects of Victorian drug use, we see a society that has made significant progress in how it handles addiction, mental health, and public health policy. However, the path to this point was paved with historical mistakes and misunderstandings. It is only by understanding the past, the widespread use of drugs, the failures of regulation, and the rise of reform movements that we can begin to address the ongoing issues with drug use and addiction in the present day.
As we move into the 20th century, the understanding and regulation of drugs continued to evolve, driven in part by the challenges faced in the Victorian era. The awareness of addiction as a disease, the rise of new substances, and the global expansion of drug trade all played significant roles in shaping modern-day drug control and treatment policies. Yet, despite the advancements, the battle against addiction remains as pressing today as it was more than a century ago. The early 20th century saw significant shifts in how drugs were viewed, both socially and medically. The opioid crisis, which began in the late 19th century with the widespread use of morphine, continued to escalate as new, more potent forms of opioids were introduced. Heroin, initially marketed as a non-addictive substitute for morphine, became a major problem by the early 1900s, and it was quickly discovered to have strong addictive properties. The creation of synthetic opioids and amphetamines in the mid-1900s further complicated the landscape of drug use. Simultaneously, the criminalization of drug use began to take root. In the United States, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 aimed to regulate and restrict the production and sale of opiates and cocaine, marking one of the first major federal attempts to control drug use. However, these measures did little to curtail addiction, as demand for narcotics remained high. The Prohibition era in the U.S.
1920 to 1933 further demonstrated the inefficiency of criminalizing substances, as the underground market for alcohol flourished and fueled organized crime. The mid-20th century brought with it a new perspective on drug addiction, particularly following the Second World War, with the rise of psychedelic substances like LSD and the increase in recreational drug use in the post-war era. Society began to recognize that addiction was not just a moral failing, but a medical issue that required more nuanced, compassionate approaches. This shift was in large part due to the rise of the medical model of addiction, which viewed addiction as a chronic disease that could be treated through therapy, education, and sometimes medication. As the drug culture of the 1960s and 1970s unfolded, especially in the wake of the counterculture movement, drug use became more mainstream. This period saw the rise of marijuana, LSD, and cocaine as recreational drugs, and the federal government's response was largely punitive. The war on drugs, which was initiated in the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan, marked a new era of drug criminalization. The focus shifted from prevention and rehabilitation to heavy law enforcement. This policy not only criminalized drug use, but disproportionately affected low-income communities and communities of color, further exacerbating the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. The war on drugs had a profound impact on how drugs were viewed in society. The stigmatization of drug users, particularly those addicted to substances like heroin and cocaine, led to the criminalization of millions. Rather than seeing addiction as a health issue, it was framed as a criminal behavior. This policy, while initially popular, created long-term social consequences, including mass incarceration and a lack of focus on prevention and treatment. As a result, the medical and social consequences of drug use and addiction continued to escalate. Despite the increasing criminalization of drugs, the understanding of addiction as a disease has made progress. The American Psychiatric Association officially recognized addiction as a medical disorder in the 1980s, marking an important turning point in the treatment of addiction. This led to the establishment of treatment programs and rehabilitation centers aimed at helping individuals recover from addiction in a more supportive and scientific manner. Modern drug policies have begun to shift again. While law enforcement still plays a significant role, there has been a growing recognition that drug addiction is not merely a criminal problem, but a public health crisis. Countries around the world have begun to adopt harm reduction strategies that focus on education, prevention, and treatment rather than just punishment. Portugal, for example, decriminalized the possession of small amounts of all drugs in 2001 and shifted resources into addiction treatment and harm reduction programs. This approach has been credited with significantly reducing drug-related deaths and improving public health outcomes. The role of education in combating drug addiction has also evolved. Today, public health campaigns focus on preventing addiction before it starts. Schools and community centers across the globe implement programs aimed at educating young people about the dangers of substance use and teaching them how to make healthy choices. The emphasis is no longer just on telling people to avoid drugs. It's also about understanding why people use drugs in the first place and how we can create healthier societies that provide the support and resources people need to live fulfilling lives without turning to substances. The globalization of the drug trade has been another significant challenge in the fight against addiction. The rise of illicit drug markets, especially for substances like heroin, cocaine, and more recently synthetic opioids, has made drugs more accessible than ever before. The availability of cheap, potent drugs has made it difficult for many individuals to resist, especially when they are in poverty or facing mental health issues. In many countries, the fight against the drug trade has led to violence, instability, and an increase in organized crime. The battle against the global drug trade is not just about enforcement, but also about addressing the underlying economic and social conditions that drive individuals into the drug trade or make them more vulnerable to addiction. Today, as the opioid crisis continues to ravage communities across the world, especially in North America, the lessons from the Victorian era's reliance on laudanum and cocaine are all too clear. The need for more comprehensive drug regulation, education, and prevention has never been greater. The understanding of addiction as a complex health issue that requires medical treatment and support rather than criminalization is slowly gaining ground. As we reflect on the impact of the Victorian era on modern-day drug use and addiction, we see a pattern that underscores the importance of regulation and responsible drug policies. The unchecked use of opium and laudanum in the 19th century, which led to widespread addiction, was the direct result of lack of regulation and societal ignorance about the dangers of drug dependency. Today, while we have made great strides in regulation, the continued fight against addiction shows us how much more is needed. In the face of modern-day challenges, including the opioid crisis, we can look to the past for lessons on how to better address drug use and how to rebuild systems that prioritize public health over criminalization.
As we continue into the modern-day fight against drug addiction, it's crucial to understand how our approach has evolved since the Victorian era. The shifts in societal, medical, and governmental responses to drug use have been monumental, but the fight is far from over. Today, we are faced with global drug crises, such as the opioid epidemic, and we continue to grapple with the challenges of addiction, drug regulation, and harm reduction. In the 20th and 21st centuries, our understanding of drug addiction has evolved from seeing it as a moral failing to acknowledging it as a chronic disease that requires medical intervention, social support, and comprehensive policy. The war on drugs, which began in the 1980s, focused heavily on criminalization and law enforcement, but it has gradually shifted towards more harm reduction policies and a public health approach. This shift recognizes that treating addiction as a health issue rather than a criminal issue leads to better outcomes for individuals and communities. The opioid epidemic, which has spread across North America, is a glaring example of how drug addiction continues to affect millions of people, regardless of socioeconomic status. In the United States, prescription opioids like OxyContin and Vicodin were once widely prescribed for pain relief, but their highly addictive nature led to widespread dependency. As these prescription drugs became more difficult to obtain, many individuals turned to heroin and fentanyl, potent and often deadly drugs that have fueled an ongoing crisis. More than 70,000 people died from drug overdoses in the U.S. in 2019, with the majority of those deaths linked to opioids. The opioid crisis has exposed the devastating impact of overprescription and the lack of understanding about the addictive potential of these substances. However, it has also driven major changes in policy and public health. The government has begun to regulate prescription practices more strictly, pushing for doctors to be more cautious in their use of opioids for pain management. At the same time, harm reduction strategies have emerged as vital tools in addressing addiction.
Harm reduction is an approach to drug addiction that focuses on minimizing the negative consequences of drug use rather than simply trying to eliminate drug use altogether. It emphasizes education, safe consumption spaces, needle exchange programs, and medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, for addiction. MAT, which includes medications like methadone and buprenorphine, helps individuals reduce cravings and manage withdrawal symptoms without experiencing the euphoric effects that come with illicit drug use. These programs have been shown to significantly improve treatment outcomes, reduce overdose deaths, and lower the spread of infectious diseases like HIV and hepatitis C. One of the most progressive approaches to drug policy can be seen in Portugal, which decriminalized the possession of small amounts of all drugs in 2001. This radical shift moved away from criminal penalties for drug users and focused instead on treatment, rehabilitation, and harm reduction. The results have been impressive. Drug-related deaths and HIV transmission rates have decreased significantly, and addiction treatment programs have expanded. Portugal's success is often cited as a model for other countries, illustrating the effectiveness of treating addiction as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. In the United States, some states have begun to follow a similar path by legalizing marijuana, recognizing its medicinal value and reducing the criminal penalties associated with its use. Legalization has sparked a broader conversation about drug policy reform, with advocates calling for the decriminalization of other drugs, such as psilocybin and MDMA, for medical use. Psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, has shown promising results in clinical trials as a treatment for depression and PTSD, while MDMA has been explored for its potential to treat trauma and anxiety disorders. These psychedelic therapies are gaining traction in the medical community, opening up new avenues for mental health treatment and addiction recovery. The global nature of the drug trade remains a significant challenge in addressing addiction. The trafficking of heroin, cocaine, and synthetic drugs has led to widespread violence, instability, and human suffering, particularly in Latin America, Asia, and parts of Africa. The global drug market often thrives in areas with weak governance, corruption, and poverty. Cartels and organized crime syndicates fuel the demand for drugs, and the illicit nature of the trade makes it difficult to address the root causes. Efforts to curb drug trafficking have been largely unsuccessful in reducing supply, and the cycle of demand and supply continues. While international drug control remains important, there is growing recognition that focusing solely on the supply side of the equation is not enough. Governments are increasingly turning to demand reduction strategies, such as prevention programs and education campaigns, to address the issue at its core. In schools, communities, and healthcare systems, programs that teach about the dangers of drug use and offer resources for mental health and addiction recovery are essential components of a comprehensive drug policy. The mental health connection with addiction is becoming more evident. In many cases, drug use is a form of self-medication for underlying mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, trauma, and PTSD. Dual diagnosis, when individuals suffer from both addiction and mental health disorders, has become a focal point in addiction treatment. Addressing both the mental health and substance use aspects of addiction at the same time is critical for effective recovery. This holistic approach focuses not only on stopping drug use, but also on healing the mind and body to prevent relapse.
There has been growing support for integrating mental health services with addiction treatment. This integration allows individuals to receive comprehensive care that addresses both the physiological and psychological aspects of addiction. As the stigma surrounding addiction continues to decrease, more people are seeking help, and society is beginning to recognize addiction as a health issue that requires treatment rather than punishment. The legalization of substances like marijuana and the rise of psychedelic therapies show that society is evolving in its approach to drugs. While there is still significant debate about the regulation of certain substances, the shift towards a public health-centered approach to addiction is gaining momentum. The lessons learned from the Victorian era, when drugs like laudanum and opium were sold freely without much thought to their consequences, continue to shape our response to drug addiction today. Despite the progress that has been made, the battle against addiction is far from over. The opioid crisis, along with the rise of synthetic drugs, continues to devastate communities around the world. However, the advances in drug treatment, prevention programs, and harm reduction strategies provide hope for the future. The key to addressing the ongoing issue of drug addiction lies in a multifaceted approach that includes education, treatment, policy reform, and international cooperation. The world is moving away from the criminalization of drug users and towards solutions that prioritize health, recovery, and social support.
As we look toward the future of global drug policies and addiction treatment, the lessons of the Victorian era and the challenges of the 20th century continue to shape our approach today. While there has been significant progress in the last few decades, the drug crisis remains a complex and global issue. The increasing availability of drugs, the growing opioid epidemic, and the rise of synthetic drugs have all led to new challenges. However, there is also hope in the form of innovative treatment methods, harm reduction strategies, and progressive drug policies that aim to minimize the harm caused by substance abuse, while prioritizing public health and recovery. One of the most significant changes in recent years is the shift away from punitive drug laws towards a public health approach. The criminalization of drug use and addiction has long been a cornerstone of many nations' drug policies, but increasing evidence suggests that this approach has failed to curb the demand for drugs or help those struggling with addiction. Instead of treating addiction as a criminal act, a public health-centered approach focuses on treating addiction as a disease, one that requires medical attention, mental health support, and community-based treatment rather than jail time or criminal charges. Countries like Portugal, which decriminalized the possession of small amounts of all drugs in 2001, have proven that drug decriminalization does not lead to chaos or an increase in drug use. In fact, Portugal's approach has been hailed as a success, with drug-related deaths and HIV transmission significantly reduced. This success story has influenced other countries to reevaluate their drug policy. Countries such as Canada and parts of the United States, where marijuana has been legalized, are seeing the benefits of drug regulation over criminalization. These changes are part of a broader trend of recognizing personal autonomy and public health as more important than the war on drugs. Decriminalization does not mean the absence of regulation. It means that drug use is no longer treated as a criminal act, but rather as a health issue. This shift allows governments to allocate resources to education, prevention, and treatment programs rather than focusing on arresting and prosecuting individuals for using substances. This approach has helped reduce the stigma attached to drug use, encouraging those struggling with addiction to seek help without fear of criminal penalties. As the understanding of addiction evolves, so too do the methods for treating it. Today, the most effective treatment for addiction is a holistic approach, one that combines medication,
therapy, and community support. This multifaceted approach is aimed at addressing not just the physiological aspects of addiction, but also the emotional and psychological factors that contribute to substance abuse. Medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, has become a cornerstone in treating addiction, especially in relation to opioids. Medications like methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone are used to help individuals manage cravings and withdrawal symptoms without the euphoric effects of illicit substances. MAT has been shown to improve outcomes for individuals in recovery, reducing relapse rates and helping people regain their lives. MAT works best when paired with behavioral therapy and counseling, which address the root causes of addiction and provide the tools necessary for long-term recovery. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, a form of talk therapy, has also proven effective in treating addiction. CBT helps individuals recognize and change negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to drug use. By teaching individuals coping skills and strategies for managing stress, anxiety, and triggers, CBT has become an integral part of the treatment process. Contingency management, which involves offering rewards for positive behaviors and progress, has also shown promise in encouraging individuals to stay engaged in treatment. As more research is conducted, innovative therapies continue to emerge. For instance, mindfulness-based interventions have gained popularity in addiction treatment as they help individuals become more aware of their thoughts and feelings and better manage cravings and stress. Yoga, meditation, and mindfulness exercises are now incorporated into many rehab programs, recognizing the connection between mind and body in the recovery process. Perhaps one of the most exciting developments in the fight against addiction is the renewed interest in psychedelic drugs as a treatment for addiction and mental health disorders. In the 1960s, psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, were used in therapeutic settings to explore the human mind. However, with the rise of countercultural movements, these substances became criminalized and research into their therapeutic potential was halted. Now, after decades of research, the medical community is revisiting the potential benefits of psychedelics in treating mental health disorders and addiction. Studies have shown that psilocybin can significantly reduce anxiety and depression in terminally ill patients, while MDMA, ecstasy, has been shown to help individuals with PTSD process trauma. Research is also being conducted into the use of LSD and psilocybin to treat addiction to alcohol, nicotine, and opioids. Psychedelic therapy works by helping individuals confront deep-seated emotional trauma or psychological distress that may contribute to their substance abuse. These drugs create powerful altered states of consciousness that allow individuals to reframe their relationship with themselves and their addiction. The use of psychedelics in a controlled, therapeutic setting is being hailed as a game-changer in addiction treatment, offering hope to those who have struggled with traditional methods of rehabilitation. While drug regulation and treatment methods are vital, the global nature of the drug trade remains a significant challenge. The trafficking of narcotics like heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines continues to fuel organized crime and instability, particularly in regions like Mexico, Colombia, Afghanistan, and Southeast Asia. The illicit drug trade thrives in areas with weak governance, poverty, and corruption, making it difficult to disrupt. While efforts have been made to address the supply side of the issue, it is clear that a more comprehensive approach is needed. International cooperation is crucial in tackling the global drug trade. Countries must work together to reduce the demand for drugs while addressing the socio-economic factors that contribute to the supply. Eradicating drug crops, providing alternative livelihoods for farmers, and addressing the root causes of drug trafficking are all part of the solution. However, law enforcement alone will not solve the problem. A multifaceted approach that includes education, economic development, and community support is necessary to disrupt the drug trade and reduce the harm caused by addiction. The future of drug policies and addiction treatment is one that prioritizes public health, prevention, and education.
Governments and organizations around the world are beginning to recognize that addiction isn't just a criminal issue. It's a public health crisis that requires comprehensive, compassionate solutions. The shift from criminalization to regulation, treatment, and education represents a more holistic approach to addressing drug addiction. As we move forward, it is essential that we continue to innovate and explore new treatment methods, while also focusing on the root causes of addiction. Mental health, poverty, and trauma all contribute to substance use disorders, and addressing these factors will be key in reducing addiction rates worldwide. Harm reduction strategies such as safe injection sites, needle exchange programs, and medication-assisted treatment must continue to be expanded and made available to those in need. In the future, we can also look to the continued advancements in psychedelic research, mental health care, and drug regulation as part of the ongoing fight against addiction. The lessons of the Victorian era, combined with modern knowledge and treatment methods, offer hope for a future where addiction is not seen as a moral failing, but as a health issue that can be treated with dignity, care, and support.
As we move into the future of global drug policies and addiction treatment, the lessons learned from the past continue to shape the current landscape of drug use and regulation. The modern-day approach to drug addiction has significantly evolved from the criminalization of substance use that dominated much of the 20th century. We now recognize addiction as a chronic disease that requires medical intervention, psychosocial support, and a more comprehensive treatment approach. This shift reflects a global movement toward public health-centered solutions to addiction, with countries adopting harm reduction strategies and prevention programs that seek to address both the supply and demand sides of the drug crisis. One of the most significant changes in recent years has been the decriminalization of drugs in various countries. The Portuguese model, for example, decriminalized the possession of small amounts of drugs in 2001 and shifted its focus from criminal justice to healthcare. This approach has yielded impressive results, with drug-related deaths significantly dropping and rates of drug abuse and HIV transmission decreasing. Portugal's success has provided a blueprint for other countries that are grappling with their own drug-related crises. Many countries, including those in Europe and Canada, are now looking at decriminalization as a potential solution to their drug problems, with an emphasis on providing access to treatment, rehabilitation, and social reintegration. The United States has seen a growing shift toward legalizing marijuana for both medical and recreational use, recognizing the health benefits of cannabis in treating conditions such as chronic pain, anxiety, and depression. As marijuana becomes more widely accepted and regulated, this shift is sparking a broader conversation about drug regulation and the potential for legalization or decriminalization of other substances such as psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms. Recent studies have shown promising results in the use of psychedelic substances in treating mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, and PTSD, with new clinical trials gaining traction in North America and Europe. The rise of psychedelic research is poised to revolutionize addiction treatment, offering a new approach to healing trauma and breaking the cycle of addiction. Despite the progress, however, the global drug trade continues to be a major problem. The trafficking of heroin, cocaine, and synthetic drugs remains rampant in many parts of the world, particularly in South America, Asia, and Africa. The illicit drug trade is driven by poverty, corruption, and lack of governance, which make it difficult to combat. While some countries have made strides in curbing the supply side of the drug problem through international agreements and law enforcement, the root causes of drug trafficking remain largely unaddressed. Without addressing economic inequality, lack of opportunity, and weak governance, it's unlikely that the global drug trade will be effectively dismantled. The solution lies not only in supply reduction, but also in improving the socio-economic conditions that drive individuals toward both trafficking drugs and becoming addicted to them. Another aspect of global drug policy that requires attention is the issue of mental health and its connection to addiction.
Many individuals who struggle with addiction also suffer from underlying mental health disorders, such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. Substance use is often a form of self-medication for individuals trying to cope with the emotional pain of untreated mental health issues. The connection between mental health and addiction is now widely recognized, but there is still a long way to go in integrating mental health care into addiction treatment programs. Treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and motivational interviewing have proven effective in addressing the psychological aspects of addiction. These therapies, when combined with medication-assisted treatment for opioid and alcohol addiction, help individuals achieve long-term recovery. However, mental health services are often limited or stigmatized, especially in low-income areas or developing countries. There is a growing need for integrated care, where addiction and mental health treatment are provided together to address the whole person. At the same time, harm reduction strategies like safe injection sites, needle exchange programs, and naloxone distribution are proving to be highly effective in reducing the negative consequences of drug use, such as overdose deaths, the spread of infectious diseases, and the social stigma surrounding addiction. Countries such as Canada, the Netherlands, and Switzerland have pioneered harm reduction initiatives that offer safe spaces for individuals to use drugs under medical supervision, reducing the risk of overdose and providing a pathway to recovery for individuals who might otherwise be reluctant to seek help. These programs are not about endorsing drug use, but about keeping people alive long enough to eventually access treatment and reintegrate into society. One of the most powerful tools in the fight against addiction is education. Public health campaigns aimed at raising awareness about the dangers of drug use and promoting healthy lifestyles can have a profound impact on reducing drug consumption. Prevention programs in schools and communities have been shown to reduce substance use among youth and create an environment where individuals are less likely to turn to drugs in the first place. However, effective prevention programs must go beyond simple deterrence and address the social determinants of health, such as poverty, trauma, and lack of opportunity that often lead individuals to substance abuse. Addressing these root causes is essential in breaking the cycle of addiction before it even begins. As we continue to develop global drug policies, it is clear that the historical context of addiction plays a critical role in shaping how we view and treat substance abuse. The lessons from the Victorian era, where addiction was often misunderstood and poorly regulated, continue to influence the way we approach drug use today. While there has been progress in understanding addiction as a disease and in developing more effective treatment methods, the fight against addiction is far from over. The next phase of this journey involves continuing to push for evidence-based drug policies, comprehensive treatment programs, and global cooperation to address the root causes of addiction. By learning from the past, embracing new solutions, and prioritizing public health, we can work toward a future where addiction is treated with the compassion, understanding, and resources that it deserves.
As we move further into the 21st century, the landscape of drug regulation and addiction treatment continues to evolve, shaped by the lessons of the past and the challenges of the present. The global drug crisis is more complex than ever, with opioid addiction, synthetic drugs, and mental health issues converging to create new public health challenges. While there has been significant progress in many areas, there is still much work to be done to ensure that drug policies and treatment strategies are effective, equitable, and compassionate. The opioid crisis has been one of the most devastating public health crises of the past few decades. What began in the 1990s with the overprescription of opioid painkillers such as OxyContin has spiraled into a full-scale crisis. with millions of people addicted to prescription opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. In the United States, the overdose death rate from opioids continues to rise, with over 70,000 deaths reported in 2019 alone. While opioid use is not a new phenomenon, the scale of the epidemic and the dangerous prevalence of synthetic opioids like fentanyl have made this crisis far more lethal than previous drug epidemics. The opioid crisis has underscored the need for better regulation and monitoring of prescription drugs. The overprescription of opioids by healthcare professionals, driven in part by aggressive pharmaceutical marketing, created an environment in which millions of people became dependent on these substances. As prescription opioids became harder to obtain, many individuals turned to illegal drugs like heroin or fentanyl, which are cheaper and often more potent, increasing the risk of overdose deaths. In response to the crisis, there has been a shift toward more responsible prescribing practices, and opioid prescriptions have significantly decreased over the past several years. However, the damage has already been done, and millions of people are still suffering from opioid addiction. In addition to better prescribing practices, there has been an increased focus on medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, for opioid addiction, which uses medications like methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone to help individuals manage their addiction and reduce cravings. MAT, when combined with counseling and therapy, has proven to be one of the most effective treatments for opioid addiction. However, the opioid crisis is not just a medical issue, it is also a social issue. The social determinants of health, such as poverty, mental health, and trauma, play a significant role in addiction. People who are struggling with mental health disorders or who have experienced trauma are at a higher risk of developing substance use disorders. Therefore, addressing the root causes of addiction, including economic inequality, lack of access to healthcare, and social isolation, is essential in tackling the opioid epidemic. While opioids remain a significant part of the global drug crisis, synthetic drugs have emerged as another major concern. Drugs like fentanyl, synthetic cannabinoids, and designer drugs have flooded the market in recent years, creating new challenges for drug regulation and treatment. Fentanyl, in particular, has been responsible for a large proportion of overdose deaths in recent years. This synthetic opioid is up to 100 times more potent than morphine, and even small doses can lead to fatal overdose. Its widespread availability, especially through illicit channels, has made it one of the deadliest substances in the world. The rise of synthetic drugs has highlighted the need for international cooperation and innovative strategies to control the global drug trade. Illicit drug manufacturers can easily alter the chemical structure of substances like fentanyl to create new, unregulated compounds, making it difficult for authorities to track and control their production and distribution. This has led to an increase in overdose deaths as users unknowingly consume deadly synthetic drugs. In addition to fentanyl, synthetic cannabinoids, often marketed as legal highs, have become a growing concern. These substances, which are often sprayed onto plant material and smoked, can have unpredictable and dangerous effects on users. Synthetic cannabinoids are not regulated, and their potency can vary widely, leading to an increased risk of acute intoxication, psychosis, and overdose. The challenge of synthetic drugs is compounded by the global nature of the drug trade. Many synthetic drugs are produced in countries with lax regulations and then smuggled across borders. International cooperation is critical in addressing the supply chain of synthetic drugs, but it must be paired with demand reduction strategies that focus on prevention, education, and treatment. Combating the illicit market for synthetic drugs requires a multifaceted approach that includes stronger border security, public health campaigns, and international drug regulation. As the global conversation around addiction continues to shift, there is growing recognition that punitive measures alone are not effective in addressing the root causes of drug abuse.
While law enforcement plays a role in controlling the drug trade, prevention, treatment, and harm reduction are now seen as the most effective tools for combating addiction and reducing the negative consequences of drug use. Harm reduction strategies have been embraced in several countries, and their effectiveness is increasingly being recognized worldwide. These strategies focus on minimizing the harm associated with drug use, rather than focusing solely on abstinence. For example, safe injection sites where individuals can inject drugs under the supervision of medical professionals have been implemented in Canada, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. These sites provide a safer environment for individuals to use drugs, reducing the risk of overdose and infection. In addition, needle exchange programs help to reduce the spread of blood-borne diseases like HIV and hepatitis C. The integration of mental health care into addiction treatment is another critical aspect of the modern approach to drug addiction. Many individuals struggling with addiction also have underlying mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, or PTSD. Addressing these conditions in parallel with addiction treatment improves the likelihood of long-term recovery. In fact, dual diagnosis, the treatment of both addiction and mental health disorders, has become a cornerstone of effective addiction care. As the conversation around addiction becomes more compassionate and public health-oriented, education plays a key role in reducing drug use and addiction rates. Prevention programs that teach young people about the dangers of drug use, provide tools to resist peer pressure, and promote healthy coping mechanisms are crucial in curbing addiction before it starts. Education campaigns can also help to reduce the stigma surrounding drug addiction, encouraging individuals to seek help without fear of judgment. In addition to school-based education programs, public health campaigns that address the dangers of alcohol and drug abuse in communities are also essential. These programs can provide information about the risks of substance use, offer resources for individuals seeking treatment, and foster a culture of acceptance and support for those in recovery. By promoting early intervention, mental health resources, and community support, these programs can have a significant impact on preventing drug addiction. As we move forward, the global fight against addiction will require collaboration at all levels, local, national, and international. No single approach will solve the problem, but a comprehensive, coordinated effort can help reduce the prevalence of addiction and improve the lives of millions of people around the world. A focus on prevention, education, treatment, and harm reduction strategies is essential in building healthier communities. The ongoing challenges of the opioid crisis, the rise of synthetic drugs, and the global drug trade require innovative policies, international cooperation, and a commitment to public health. By learning from the past, embracing evidence-based solutions, and continuing to evolve our approach, we can create a future where addiction is treated with compassion and understanding, and where people struggling with addiction can find the support and resources they need to live healthy, fulfilling lives.
As we move deeper into the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in addressing addiction on a global scale, it's important to consider the regional disparities and the unique challenges that different parts of the world face. While harm reduction strategies and public health-oriented approaches are gaining traction globally, there are significant variations in how different countries and regions approach drug regulation and addiction treatment. These disparities are shaped by factors such as cultural attitudes, economic conditions, legal frameworks, and healthcare systems, which all contribute to the ways that addiction is both treated and prevented. In many developing countries, where poverty, lack of access to healthcare, and political instability prevail, the issue of addiction often becomes intertwined with broader societal issues. In regions with limited healthcare infrastructure, people who suffer from addiction are often left without access to medical treatment or mental health care. In these areas, drug use is not only a public health crisis, but also a social and economic issue that exacerbates existing vulnerabilities. For example, in parts of Africa and South Asia,
where the drug trade thrives in economically deprived regions, many communities face a double burden of addiction and economic hardship. The prevalence of drugs like heroin and methamphetamines in these regions has led to a rise in drug trafficking, creating a cycle of poverty, violence, and drug dependence. In these areas, access to addiction treatment is often minimal, and when it is available, it is frequently not accessible to those who need it the most. Outpatient care, rehabilitation centers, and community support programs may be scarce, and treatment options often do not address the underlying issues of poverty, lack of education, and mental health that contribute to addiction. In countries with poor infrastructure, it's crucial that addiction treatment programs are not just about the drugs themselves, but also the wider social-economic environment that people find themselves in. Addressing economic inequality and improving access to basic healthcare, education, and job opportunities can be just as important as addressing the addiction itself. In contrast, developed countries like those in North America and Europe have seen significant progress in terms of addiction treatment and prevention. Medication-assisted treatment, MAT, rehabilitation programs, and harm reduction strategies are widely available in many parts of the world. Countries such as Canada, the United Kingdom, and parts of Germany have adopted more public health-based approaches to addiction, focusing on treatment rather than punishment. These countries have also seen the implementation of safe injection sites and needle exchange programs, which have helped reduce overdose deaths and the spread of infectious diseases like HIV and hepatitis C. In the United States, the opioid epidemic continues to be a central focus of public health policy, and while harm reduction strategies are still debated in some regions, others are beginning to adopt these approaches. For example, some states have passed laws to allow safe injection sites and needle exchange programs, while the opioid crisis has spurred greater investment in MAT for individuals struggling with addiction. The legalization of marijuana in several states has also sparked a larger conversation about drug decriminalization and regulation, signaling a potential shift away from the criminalization of drug users toward a health-centered approach. The increasing legalization of marijuana is another significant change in global drug policy. In countries like Canada and several U.S. states, marijuana is now legal for both medicinal and recreational use. This marks a dramatic shift from past drug policies, which focused primarily on prohibition and criminalization. The legalization of marijuana is not just a policy change. It represents a cultural shift in how society views drug use. It has led to increased access to marijuana for medical purposes, including for people suffering from chronic pain, anxiety, insomnia, and other conditions. The regulation of marijuana has also created new opportunities for economic growth, including the creation of new jobs and the generation of tax revenue. However, legalization has also raised concerns about the potential increase in use, particularly among young people, and about the impact on mental health and public safety. Despite these concerns, countries that have legalized marijuana have generally reported positive outcomes in terms of revenue generation, reduced drug-related arrests, and reduced opioid use. The legalization of marijuana is a bold step, but it also presents new challenges, such as the need for effective regulation and public education to ensure that it is used responsibly. One of the most critical aspects of modern drug regulation and treatment is the recognition that mental health plays a significant role in addiction. More than ever, the connection between mental health disorders and substance use is being acknowledged. Individuals with depression, anxiety, trauma, and PTSD are more likely to use drugs as a way of self-medicating. Dual diagnosis, when someone suffers from both addiction and a mental health disorder, is increasingly being recognized as a central issue in the fight against addiction. Treating addiction and mental health disorders together is essential for effective recovery. Integrated care models, which combine addiction treatment with mental health care, are proving to be more effective than treating addiction and mental health separately. This holistic approach focuses on healing the person as a whole, not just focusing on one aspect of their illness. Providing access to mental health services, counseling, and supportive therapies alongside substance use treatment is key to long-term recovery and well-being. As we look to the future, it is clear that global drug policies must continue to evolve. The war on drugs has failed to address the root causes of addiction and has led to mass incarceration, particularly in low-income communities and communities of color. In many countries, there is a growing recognition that addiction should be treated as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. As we adopt evidence-based policies, harm reduction strategies, and mental health integration, the future looks promising for more compassionate and effective solutions to addiction. The fight against addiction is global. It requires international cooperation, cross-border partnerships, and a shared commitment to public health. As we continue to move away from punitive measures and focus on treatment, education, and prevention, we can create a future where addiction is treated with dignity and compassion rather than stigma and punishment. It is clear that our approach to addiction must be comprehensive, holistic, and rooted in public health principles. The work is far from over, but the progress we have made so far shows that change is possible. By continuing to learn from the past, invest in innovative treatments, and prioritize the well-being of individuals struggling with addiction, we can build a healthier, more supportive world for future generations.
As we continue to look at how different regions around the world are responding to addiction and drug-related challenges, it's clear that while there are global trends and shared goals, the approaches to treatment, regulation, and prevention vary significantly. The global drug trade and the opioid crisis continue to create complex and unique challenges, especially in countries with high levels of addiction, limited healthcare infrastructure, and precarious political situations. Understanding these regional differences is essential to developing more effective and targeted strategies to combat drug addiction and its consequences. In North America, the opioid crisis remains one of the most pressing challenges in addiction treatment. In the United States, the problem of opioid addiction has reached epidemic levels, with millions affected by prescription painkillers, heroin, and fentanyl. The epidemic has created widespread public health challenges, including overdose deaths, HIV outbreaks, and increased healthcare costs. Efforts to combat the crisis have focused on legislative reforms, such as the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, opioid prescription limitations, and the expansion of access to medication-assisted treatment, MAT. MAT programs, which include medications like methadone and buprenorphine, are widely considered the most effective form of treatment for opioid addiction, yet their availability and accessibility remain a major issue in many parts of the U.S. In addition to MAT, there is growing recognition of the need for a more comprehensive approach to addiction, which includes mental health services, trauma-informed care, and support systems for individuals in recovery. Integrated care models that address both addiction and mental health issues simultaneously are increasingly seen as critical to successful recovery. However, accessibility to these services remains inconsistent, particularly in rural areas and low-income communities, where addiction is often compounded by economic hardship and lack of resources. While the United States has made progress in terms of drug decriminalization and harm reduction, including the legalization of marijuana in several states, the criminalization of drug use remains a major issue. The war on drugs, which began in the 1980s, has led to the mass incarceration of minority communities and the stigmatization of drug use. Efforts to decriminalize or legalize drugs in the U.S. are still limited by political polarization and deep-rooted societal attitudes toward drug use and addiction. In Europe, particularly in countries like the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Portugal, there has been a much more progressive approach to drug regulation and addiction treatment. Portugal's decriminalization of all drugs in 2001 is one of the most significant successes in drug policy reform, and it has become a model for other countries. Portugal's approach focuses on public health rather than criminalization,
with significant investment in addiction treatment programs, mental health care, and harm reduction measures. The decriminalization of drugs has been coupled with an emphasis on rehabilitation, and the country has seen a dramatic reduction in drug-related deaths, HIV transmission rates, and drug-related crime. The Netherlands has also been a leader in harm reduction approaches, with safe injection sites, needle exchange programs, and substitution therapy, such as methadone, widely available. These measures are aimed at reducing the public health risks associated with drug use while offering support in rehabilitation options to individuals struggling with addiction. The Netherlands has shown that public health policies focused on treatment and prevention rather than punishment can lead to better outcomes for both individuals and society. In Latin America, the issue of drug addiction and trafficking is inextricably linked to organized crime, poverty, and political instability. Countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil have long struggled with the dual challenges of drug trafficking and drug addiction. The illegal drug trade has fueled violence, corruption, and human rights abuses in these regions, and efforts to combat the problem have often been ineffective. In many cases, the militarized approach to fighting drug cartels has led to further violence and social unrest. In response to these challenges, some countries in Latin America have begun to shift their focus to harm reduction and public health-oriented approaches. In Mexico, for example, there have been discussions about decriminalizing marijuana and creating safer spaces for drug users, but political resistance and the power of the drug cartels have slowed progress. In Brazil, there has been the rise of community-based rehabilitation programs that emphasize social integration and psychosocial support for individuals in recovery. One of the most pressing challenges in South America is the relationship between drug trafficking and poverty. In regions where drug cultivation is a primary source of income, such as in the Andean countries, the trade of coca plants for cocaine production has led to a vicious cycle of poverty, violence, and addiction. Many individuals and families are trapped in this cycle, unable to access alternative livelihoods. Efforts to reduce drug cultivation have had limited success, with many farmers turning to alternative crops or leaving their communities in search of work. In Asia, the issue of drug addiction and drug trafficking is similarly complex. Countries like China, India, and Afghanistan are major producers of illegal drugs, particularly opium and methamphetamines, and face significant challenges in addressing addiction within their borders. China, in particular, has adopted a zero-tolerance approach to drugs, using strict law enforcement and punitive measures to combat drug use. While this has led to a reduction in drug-related crime, it has also stifled open discussion about drug addiction and treatment. In contrast, India has begun to embrace a more comprehensive approach to addiction, with efforts to expand access to treatment, particularly for opioid dependence. The government has also implemented harm reduction strategies, including needle exchange programs and opioid substitution therapy. Despite these efforts, the lack of mental health care infrastructure and prevention programs remains a barrier to effective treatment. Afghanistan remains one of the largest producers of opium, with the drug trade fueling much of the country's ongoing conflict and instability. Despite international efforts to curb poppy cultivation, the drug trade continues to thrive, and many individuals in rural areas are dependent on opium for survival. The lack of infrastructure, poverty, and political instability make it difficult to address both addiction and the illegal drug trade. Across Africa, drug addiction is often compounded by social and economic challenges. In some parts of East Africa, the trade of heroin and cocaine is on the rise, and efforts to combat drug addiction are hindered by weak healthcare systems and limited access to addiction treatment. However, countries like South Africa have made strides in mental health care and addiction recovery, establishing outpatient clinics and support groups to help those struggling with addiction. As the world grapples with the global drug crisis, the need for innovative, collaborative approaches has never been more critical. The rise of global partnerships and international agreements to address drug trafficking, addiction, and public health issues is a positive development, but it requires long-term commitment from both governments and civil society. Addressing the issue of addiction will require a comprehensive, global approach that includes prevention, treatment, education, and economic development. It is essential to ensure that no one is left behind in the fight against addiction and that policies continue to evolve based on the latest scientific research and public health principles.
As we continue to explore the ongoing evolution of addiction treatment and mental health integration, it's clear that both fields have become inextricably linked in modern-day approaches to addressing drug use and addiction. The intersection of mental health and substance use disorders has highlighted the need for comprehensive, integrated treatment that addresses the whole person, rather than focusing solely on the drug use itself. In this section, we will examine innovative treatment methods that have emerged as effective strategies for addiction recovery, with a particular focus on the integration of mental health care and addiction treatment. The connection between mental health and addiction is well established. Many individuals who suffer from substance use disorders also struggle with mental health disorders, such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. This dual diagnosis, often referred to as co-occurring disorders or comorbidities, presents unique challenges for treatment. It's crucial to recognize that mental health issues and substance use disorders often feed into each other, creating a vicious cycle. For example, individuals with untreated anxiety or depression may use drugs or alcohol as a form of self-medication to cope with their emotions, only to find that their drug use worsens their mental health symptoms. In response to the growing understanding of this connection, there has been a significant shift toward integrated care models that address both addiction and mental health simultaneously. The goal is to treat both conditions concurrently, recognizing that successful recovery requires more than just stopping drug use. It requires addressing the underlying psychological and emotional factors that contribute to substance abuse. One of the most effective integrated treatment approaches is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. CBT is a well-established treatment for both addiction and mental health disorders, and it focuses on helping individuals identify and challenge the negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to their addiction. CBT is especially helpful for individuals who are struggling with anxiety, depression, or trauma, as it teaches individuals to reframe their thoughts and develop healthier coping mechanisms. CBT is often combined with medication-assisted treatment, MAT, which helps manage withdrawal symptoms and cravings associated with substance use. Another key component of integrated treatment is dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which has gained significant attention in recent years. DBT is a form of therapy that emphasizes mindfulness, emotional regulation, and acceptance. It is particularly effective for individuals with borderline personality disorder, BPD, or emotionally intense conditions, as it helps individuals learn how to manage overwhelming emotions without resorting to substance use. DBT combines cognitive behavioral principles with mindfulness practices, helping individuals become more aware of their thoughts and feelings and teaching them how to cope with distress in healthier ways. The use of medications in addiction treatment has become a standard practice in many recovery programs. Medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, has proven to be one of the most effective methods for treating opioid addiction, alcohol dependence, and nicotine addiction. MAT works by using FDA-approved medications to help individuals manage withdrawal symptoms and cravings while they work through the psychological aspects of addiction. For opioid use disorder, medications like methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone have been shown to reduce cravings, improve treatment retention, and significantly decrease the risk of relapse. These medications help individuals stabilize their lives and focus on therapy and recovery rather than being consumed by withdrawal symptoms or cravings. Buprenorphine, for example, is a partial agonist that stimulates opioid receptors in the brain without producing the intense high associated with illicit opioid use, allowing individuals to regain control over their lives and break free from the cycle of addiction. For alcohol use disorder, medications such as disulfiram, acamprosate, and naltrexone are commonly used in combination with therapy to reduce alcohol consumption and the risk of relapse. These medications work by either reducing the pleasurable effects of alcohol
or by increasing unpleasant symptoms when alcohol is consumed. Naltrexone, for example, blocks the effects of alcohol on the brain's reward system, making drinking less enjoyable and helping individuals maintain sobriety. The use of medication in addiction treatment must be carefully managed and personalized, particularly for individuals with dual diagnoses. Individuals with co-occurring mental health disorders may require adjustments in their medication regimen to ensure that the treatment addresses both their substance use and their mental health needs. Medications like antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and mood stabilizers are commonly prescribed alongside MAT to help individuals manage their mental health symptoms as they recover from addiction. In recent years, psychedelic substances have garnered attention as a promising treatment for addiction and mental health disorders. Psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, has shown potential in helping individuals with depression, anxiety, and addiction break free from negative thought patterns and trauma. Clinical trials have demonstrated that psilocybin therapy, when combined with psychotherapy, can lead to long-lasting improvements in mental health and a reduction in addictive behaviors. Similarly, MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy, has shown promise as a treatment for individuals with PTSD and substance use disorders. Studies have shown that MDMA therapy can help individuals process traumatic experiences and gain emotional insight, which can be crucial in overcoming addiction. MDMA works by increasing serotonin levels in the brain, promoting a sense of empathy, and helping individuals open up emotionally during therapy sessions. The use of psychedelics in treatment is still in the early stages of clinical research, but the results are promising, especially for individuals who have not responded to traditional forms of therapy. Psychedelic substances are believed to help individuals reframe their relationship with addiction and mental health, providing profound insights that can aid in the recovery process. While these therapies are not without risks, particularly in unregulated settings, the growing body of research suggests that psychedelics may offer a new frontier in addiction treatment. While psychedelic therapies and medication-assisted treatments have gained significant attention in Western countries, there are also global efforts to address addiction in diverse cultural contexts. Many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have started to recognize addiction as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue, leading to more effective treatment policies and programs. In India, for example, addiction is often linked to poverty and social issues, with many individuals turning to substances like alcohol, opioids, and synthetic drugs as a way of coping with life's challenges. Efforts to address addiction in India have focused on increasing access to treatment centers, rehabilitation programs, and mental health care. However, mental health care remains limited in many parts of the country, and there is still a significant stigma associated with seeking help for addiction. In Africa, addiction treatment is often hampered by under-resourced healthcare systems and a lack of awareness about substance use disorders. However, in countries like South Africa, community-based treatment programs are emerging, focusing on both mental health care and addiction recovery. These programs often incorporate local cultural practices and community support systems, recognizing the importance of addressing addiction within the context of the broader social fabric. As global drug use and addiction continue to increase, it's clear that no single approach will work for every country or region. The integration of mental health care, innovative therapies, and culturally appropriate treatment programs is essential to creating a holistic approach to addiction recovery that meets the needs of diverse populations.
As we explore the evolving landscape of addiction treatment, it becomes increasingly clear that integrating mental health services with substance abuse treatment is essential for addressing the full scope of addiction. The importance of mental health integration in addiction treatment cannot be overstated, as many individuals struggling with addiction also face co-occurring mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. The overlap between these conditions creates a complex treatment challenge, as addiction often serves as a form of self-medication for unresolved psychological pain. Therefore, effective treatment must tackle both issues simultaneously to foster long-term recovery. Dual diagnosis is becoming increasingly recognized as a critical factor in addiction. Traditional addiction treatment often focuses solely on substance use, without addressing the mental health factors that contribute to addiction. However, modern addiction treatment has shifted toward a comprehensive approach that recognizes the importance of addressing both addiction and mental health conditions. This dual approach is necessary because addiction is rarely just about the drugs. It is often intertwined with psychological issues that make recovery more difficult. In Europe, countries like the United Kingdom and Germany have pioneered integrated treatment models, where mental health services and addiction treatment are provided in tandem. These models emphasize the importance of treating mental health and substance use disorders together, recognizing that the two are often deeply connected. For example, individuals with PTSD or trauma-related disorders may use substances like alcohol or opioids to numb emotional pain. Without addressing the underlying trauma, addiction treatment is less likely to be successful in the long term. Integrating therapy with medication-assisted treatment, MAT, allows individuals to address the psychological roots of their addiction while simultaneously managing their cravings and withdrawal symptoms. This integrated approach has shown remarkable success in treating opioid addiction, alcohol use disorder, and other substance use disorders. Similarly, North American countries are increasingly adopting integrated treatment strategies. In the United States, there has been a growing recognition that mental health treatment and substance use disorder treatment need to be intertwined, particularly in the context of the opioid crisis. The rise of opioid use disorder has placed a spotlight on the importance of comprehensive care, where medications like methadone and buprenorphine are used alongside behavioral therapies and psychosocial support. This holistic approach is proving to be far more effective than the previous more siloed treatment models, which treated mental health and addiction separately. By treating both issues together, individuals are more likely to experience lasting recovery. In Asia, the integration of mental health into addiction treatment is still a relatively new concept, but there is increasing recognition of its importance. Countries like India, China, and Thailand have traditionally treated addiction as a moral failing rather than a medical or psychological issue. As a result, addiction treatment has often been punitive rather than supportive. However, in recent years, there has been a growing push for a more comprehensive and public health-centered approach. For example, India has begun to invest in addiction treatment centers that combine mental health care with substance use disorder services, though challenges remain in accessibility and stigma. In many regions of Asia, mental health services remain scarce, and the lack of awareness about the connection between addiction and mental health is a major barrier to effective treatment. One area where mental health and addiction treatment are coming together in a groundbreaking way is through the use of psychedelic-assisted therapies. Psychedelics such as psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and MDMA, ecstasy, are gaining increasing attention for their potential to treat both mental health disorders and substance use disorders. In recent clinical trials, psilocybin has shown promise in treating depression, anxiety, and addiction, with results that are lasting far beyond traditional therapies. MDMA has also shown remarkable efficacy in helping individuals process trauma related to PTSD. The potential for psychedelic therapy to transform addiction treatment is immense, as it offers a way to address the deep-rooted emotional issues that often drive addiction. In South America, the use of cultural and holistic practices to treat addiction is gaining recognition. Countries like Brazil and Peru are incorporating traditional healing practices into modern treatment models. These practices often focus on the mind-body connection and the importance of community support. For example, ayahuasca,
a psychedelic brew used by indigenous groups in the Amazon, is gaining attention as a potential treatment for addiction, depression, and PTSD. While still controversial in many parts of the world, the therapeutic use of ayahuasca and other plant medicines represents a unique cultural approach to addressing addiction and mental health that combines traditional wisdom with modern therapeutic practices. Africa faces unique challenges when it comes to addiction and mental health. In many African countries, the stigma around mental health is still incredibly strong, and addiction is often viewed as a moral failing rather than a medical condition. Despite these challenges, countries like South Africa have made significant strides in integrating mental health care with addiction treatment. The South African government has developed several community-based addiction treatment programs that incorporate mental health support and peer counseling. These programs emphasize the importance of social support and community reintegration in the recovery process. However, many countries in sub-Saharan Africa still lack the resources and infrastructure to provide effective treatment for addiction and mental health disorders. As the global understanding of addiction evolves, it's clear that mental health care is an integral part of the recovery process. The need for comprehensive, integrated care is more apparent than ever. The challenge moving forward is to ensure that addiction treatment is accessible to everyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status, location, or cultural background. Providing mental health services, addiction treatment, and social support as part of a unified approach will lead to better outcomes for individuals and communities around the world. In conclusion, the ongoing global fight against addiction is increasingly focused on a holistic approach that recognizes the deep connection between mental health and substance use disorders. Through innovative treatments like psychedelic therapies, medication-assisted treatment, MAT, and integrated care models, there is hope for lasting recovery. As global drug policies continue to evolve, it is essential to focus on compassion, education, and support for individuals struggling with addiction, and to remove the stigma that often prevents people from seeking help. The future of addiction treatment is one of collaboration, innovation, and a deep understanding of the complex relationship between addiction and mental health.
As we look forward, it's clear that addiction treatment is evolving with the times, and technology is playing a crucial role in shaping this change. The integration of technology into addiction recovery is providing new opportunities for treatment and support, offering innovative solutions that make recovery more accessible and effective. From online therapy platforms to smartphone apps and virtual recovery communities, technology is making it easier than ever for individuals to seek help, stay connected, and manage their recovery. Digital therapeutics, a field that uses digital tools and platforms to treat mental health and addiction disorders, has been gaining traction in recent years. These tools often focus on behavioral interventions, cognitive therapy, and relapse prevention. Some apps help users track their recovery journey, set goals, and receive real-time feedback and encouragement. These apps can be especially useful for individuals who live in remote areas or face challenges accessing in-person care due to financial constraints or social stigma. For example, apps like Sober Grid and I Am Sober offer individuals the opportunity to connect with others in recovery, find peer support, and track their sober days. These apps create virtual communities where users can interact with others who understand their struggles and share their experiences. The 24/7 accessibility of these digital platforms is crucial for providing continuous support for those who may not have easy access to local recovery groups or treatment centers. Another technological advancement in addiction treatment is the use of virtual reality, or VR. VR therapy has been used in a variety of settings, including addiction treatment, to help individuals confront and overcome triggers that may lead to substance use. VR allows users to immerse themselves in controlled, simulated environments
where they can practice coping strategies and emotional regulation in response to stressful situations. This type of therapy has shown promise in treating addiction to substances like alcohol, cigarettes, and even opioids. The immersive nature of VR helps individuals engage with the therapy in a way that feels real and impactful. As technology advances, telehealth and online therapy are becoming increasingly popular. The ability to access therapy sessions remotely, especially during times when in-person appointments may not be feasible, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic, has expanded access to care. For individuals living in rural or underserved areas, telehealth provides a lifeline to recovery services that might not otherwise be available. Online therapy platforms like BetterHelp and Talkspace allow individuals to access professional counseling without the need to travel or deal with the social stigma that may come with attending an in-person therapy session. Furthermore, artificial intelligence, or AI, is being used to enhance addiction treatment. AI-driven algorithms can analyze data and provide personalized treatment recommendations based on an individual's behavior, history, and preferences. AI-powered apps can monitor a person's progress, track their emotional state, and provide real-time interventions when signs of relapse or cravings are detected. These tools offer the potential for highly personalized and effective care, empowering individuals to take control of their recovery process and make informed decisions about their treatment. While technology is certainly advancing, it is essential that it complements traditional addiction treatment methods rather than replace them. Face-to-face therapy, support groups, and community engagement will always play a crucial role in recovery. Technology should be viewed as a supplement and additional tool that enhances the recovery experience, providing individuals with more options for support, treatment, and connection. Alongside technological advancements, the global movement toward decriminalization and drug policy reform is gaining momentum. As we look toward the future, drug policies are beginning to focus on public health rather than punishment. Countries around the world, inspired by Portugal's success, are decriminalizing the possession of small amounts of drugs and prioritizing access to rehabilitation and support over incarceration. This shift marks a significant change in how addiction is viewed and treated, emphasizing the need for compassionate care over criminalization. The mental health crisis is also intertwined with the ongoing addiction epidemic. Increasing access to mental health care, reducing stigma around seeking help, and ensuring that addiction recovery programs address psychological and emotional well-being will continue to be essential in the years to come. Many individuals with addiction also experience depression, anxiety, trauma, and PTSD. And treating these underlying conditions is just as important as addressing the addiction itself. As global awareness and understanding of addiction continue to grow, the future of addiction treatment will be shaped by a combination of innovative therapies, integrated care, and public health policies that prioritize treatment over punishment. We are moving toward a future where recovery is seen as a journey, not a destination, one that requires support, compassion, and long-term care. Good night, and may we continue to embrace compassionate treatment, innovative technologies, and public health approaches to addiction recovery. Together, we can create a future where addiction is understood, treated, and prevented with dignity, respect, and support for those who need it most.
This concludes the exploration of addiction treatment and mental health integration in the future of global drug policies. If you'd like to dive deeper into specific regions or treatment advancements, feel free to let me know. As we delve further into addiction treatment and mental health integration, it becomes evident that we are at a crucial turning point in how we approach these intertwined issues. The understanding of addiction as a chronic disease rather than a moral failing has transformed the way society addresses substance use disorder. At the same time, recognizing the mental health factors that fuel addiction has opened the door to more comprehensive and effective treatment options. The technological advancements in addiction treatment, including telehealth, digital platforms, VR therapy, and AI-driven care, offer incredible potential for more personalized and accessible support. These tools are already changing the way we approach recovery, especially in underserved areas where access to in-person care might be limited. The integration of smartphone apps and online therapy platforms makes it easier for individuals to engage with recovery, track their progress, and stay connected with supportive communities. However, these advancements are not meant to replace the human connection that is central to addiction recovery. Face-to-face therapy, support groups, and community involvement will always remain vital components of successful treatment. Technology should be viewed as an addition, providing people with the tools they need to enhance their recovery journey, rather than replacing traditional methods that have long been proven effective. One of the most powerful shifts in addiction treatment is the growing global movement toward decriminalization and public health-centered drug policies. Inspired by the success of Portugal and other countries, many regions are moving toward policies that prioritize treatment and rehabilitation over punishment. This shift represents a recognition that addiction is a health crisis, not a criminal one, and it signals a future where compassionate care takes precedence over stigmatization. In addition, as we continue to learn from the past, it's clear that addressing the root causes of addiction, such as mental health disorders, poverty, trauma, and social isolation, is just as important as providing medical treatment. A holistic approach to addiction care that treats the whole person, including their physical, emotional, and social well-being, will yield the most successful long-term recovery outcomes. The future of addiction treatment is not only about innovative therapies, but also about expanding access to care, reducing stigma, and building supportive communities where recovery is seen as a journey, not just a destination. The fight against addiction is a global issue that requires collaboration and compassion across borders. By continuing to focus on prevention, education, and comprehensive care, we can create a future where addiction is understood, treated, and managed in a way that restores dignity and hope for those affected. As we look to the future, the ongoing advancements in addiction treatment, mental health care, and drug policy reform offer us hope for a healthier, more compassionate world. The work that remains is challenging, but with a unified approach that emphasizes compassion, accessibility, and support, we can help those struggling with addiction find healing, restoration, and a brighter future. Good night, and may we continue to learn from the past, embrace innovative solutions, and work towards a future where those affected by addiction find the care and support they deserve.